I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
I saw one of the coolest gifts the other day. And it was almost one of those moments where well, actually no, it wasn't almost. It was one of those moments where I regretted that I hadn't done it when I saw this gift. And I'm going to talk more about this much later in the show this week. Welcome to my Nerd World and the Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice, episode 116. It doesn't matter the number. We're here to talk about Star Wars, and I'm glad you're here with me once again this week. So I saw this GIF, and it was on Twitter. Somebody had actually pinned it to their Twitter feed. It was a Star Wars Twitter account, and I can't remember what the name of it was, so my apologies. But it was just a GIF file, however you want to say it. And it was Luke at the end of Return of the Jedi throwing his lightsaber off to the side. And I think the person had just tweeted, like, I'm just going to leave this right here. And you knew, like, you know why he put it there. Or she put it there. They put it there. You know why they put it there. At least my interpretation was, you know, it's kind of ridiculous that people gave Rian Johnson such a hard time for The Last Jedi and Luke throwing the lightsaber over his shoulder when he did the same thing in Return of the Jedi. Just wanted to get that out there. All right, so on the show this week, it is a very quiet week news-wise, apart from the physical release this week of Star Wars The Last Jedi. We'll, of course, talk a bit about that. Got a couple of comments, not going to be too heavy. You know, I say that, and I'm probably going to regret it. I'm not going to get too heavy on The Last Jedi this week. We've spent a lot of time talking about The Last Jedi over the course, well, since the movie's come out. And I do anticipate a further conversation for next week's show. I'm awaiting my physical Blu-ray to arrive, and so I'm definitely going to want to be spending some time with the movie and the Blu-ray, even though I've seen, I think, pretty much everything of the special features because I caved and I bought the digital release. But I did not watch the movie this weekend. I held off. I wanted to take a break for a week because I pretty much have been watching it every single week since its release, a couple times when it was still in the theater. So you know, I want to wait until I've got some fresh eyes on it after giving it a little bit of space. And then we're going to be getting headlong into Solo promotion, and we'll talk a bit about that on the show today. Want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the future of the franchise, the movies that are going to be made, the TV shows, whether it's the live action or the cartoon, and I just want to talk briefly about the characters that have not been on the big screen that I would love to see in a movie, and then the bulk of the show again this week is listener feedback, and I cannot thank you enough for all of the comments and the emails that I've received. Really do appreciate it. It's just it brings a lot of joy to me that you guys are enjoying the show and commenting, and so I spend we're gonna spend quite a bit of time again doing listener feedback this week. So that'll be the bulk of the show towards the second half of the show. But let's start off here, and that is Rian Johnson, a physical release this week. He was speaking with Fandango and Eric Davis at South by Southwest. And it talks about in this article, saying where the awesome making of documentary The Director and the Jedi premiered. And Rian Johnson said he's not taking into account fan criticism over The Last Jedi for his new trilogy. No, not really. I feel like every Star Wars thing that ever gets made has a big and loud response because Star Wars fans are passionate. And that's what makes them awesome. But no, I don't think it's possible if you're really telling a story you care about and having it come from your heart, it's just not possible to be intellectually processing what everyone else wants. Nor would it be a good thing or a healthy thing. I don't think that's a good way to tell a story. It's not a good way to tell a story. Trying to cater to an audience is not a good way to tell a story. J.J. Abrams did that, I think, to a certain extent. But J.J. Abrams also made a movie that he wanted to make, and it was delightful, and has said, and I've repeated this over and over again, that J.J. Abrams has said they had to go backwards to go forwards. There was a bit of an establishing of what had come before it to get everybody back into a place of Star Wars. And I still contend that it was a masterstroke by Kathleen Kennedy to hire a director like Rian Johnson to go and switch it up and to change things up and to make something unique and different and open up new aspects of the Force and things that we haven't seen before. You know, Rebels did that quite a bit. I mean, Rebels, there's a lot of stuff in Rebels if you haven't watched that Disney animation show. There's a lot of stuff they introduced in Rebels that we had never as fans seen before. I do think that there's a level of acceptance that people have when it's not something that appears on the screen. And I don't want to get into all the criticism again of The Last Jedi. I really, really don't. But I just want to say again that I'm so appreciative that Rian Johnson took the risks that he did, right? Almost like he took the hit to open it up. He took the backlash. You know, you can't, sometimes you got to tear down to build up, right? It has to be challenging, and it's not always going to agree with everybody. And sometimes there are just certain people that are more adept to dealing with that kind of stuff than other people are. And I think Rian Johnson is one of those individuals on a personal level. And I'm kind of deviating off my point, but what I'm trying to say now is that Rian Johnson, I think, as a person, from what little I know of him that I've seen in interviews, that I've read about him, he seems like the kind of person that is more than willing to go and accept the backlash because he knows that he created something genuine and authentic to himself and for himself. And those that ended up being moved by this movie or appreciated this movie are going to have a deeper love and appreciation for The Last Jedi because of that very thing. And there's an email that I'll get to from one of our listeners, from you, that kind of speaks a bit to this and does some comparison between The Last Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back. So we'll spend some time, a bit of time talking about that again in the listener feedback portion of the show. But I'm really excited. Just on a side note, I'm really excited to get the physical DVD in my hands. Blu-ray in my hands. I like to have my physical copies of my movies, and I know that we're heading in a direction where it's mostly going to be streaming in the near future. I still find a little bit less quality in streaming, even though that's just me and how, I don't know, anal I am about what I watch and how good the picture is. But I like to have my physical copy, and so even though I've had the digital copy now for a couple weeks, it still doesn't feel like I own the movie yet, right? I mean, I own it in the sense of I can go watch it whenever I want, but I don't have it physically in my hands. And I think a lot of that goes back to us who have been around for a few, for tens of 20 years, 30 years with or more with Star Wars. It is that tangible thing, the collectibles, the action figures, the hard copy of the movie goes along with that. And I know that eventually my purchasing of films is probably going to go the same way that it is for music now. I only buy discs for bands that I want to make sure I still have a hard copy of, especially when it comes to Depeche Mode. I'll always buy, as long as they put out a physical release, I will buy that physical release, even though for the most part I'm listening to it on my phone or digitally on my iPod, plugged into my stereo at home. But I'm really looking forward to getting my hands. I got the blue, I got the steel case from Best Buy, and that was mostly because I had a bunch of gift certificates because I'm a rewards member for Best Buy. It's not going to be uniform with my collection, but I also know that at some point in time when they put together another box set, I'll probably end up purchasing that box set, and the Blu-rays that I have now will be handed down to my sons. And so I got the special 4K steel book, blah-bitty, blah, blah, blah. And I really like the artwork on the steel book as well. So I'm really excited. I hope it comes here on Tuesday, and then my intent is come the end of the week, if I don't watch it beforehand, watching the movie sometime between now and the next episode. But going back to my original line of thinking and the reaction not influencing Rian Johnson's approach to a new trilogy, it got me thinking, well, what is he going to do with the new trilogy? I mean, we have nothing to go off of. I know there was a recent interview done with Ron Bergman, who told a reporter at some event that the work had begun on the new trilogy. So we're beyond now the early phases, and he was saying the work has now begun. And I imagine that a lot of this is probably that pre-production work, that guided art direction that they use. For those that don't know, the process that they use now, and this isn't too far off of what George Lucas originally did with the original trilogy, but they actually start the process of doing the artwork for the movie long before they even have a script done. Basically, they had the artists start coming up with different ideas based off of just thought process or potential of question or potential of characters or potential of locations. So I imagine right now they're probably doing that free form sort of art direction. It's one of the things that's really, really fascinating about the Force Awakens art book, is that you see like all of these different strange ideas they came up with long before J.J. Abrams had ever landed on a script. But when I started thinking about what does Rian Johnson do for this trilogy, I just don't know. You want to talk about uncharted territory. We all have we kind of all already have our preconceived notions and ideas of what Star Wars trilogies look like, right? With the large enemy and a rebellion or resistance going at each other, with these personal stories of this family at its core, but not to mention just the poetic story beats that these movies use. Weapons of mass destruction that are used, and space battles and ground battles and things like this. I mean, we all have our ideas, and even going into the sequel trilogy, one could kind of, in a very rough way, say, well, more than likely we're going to be here. This First Order is going to be the new enemy trying to take over the galaxy, and the Resistance is going to have to wage a battle against them that eventually they're going to win, and there are super weapons involved, whether it's Starkiller Base or that cannon that ended up on Crate at the end of The Last Jedi. So when you go and think about what Rian Johnson is going to do, I'm assuming we're going to be tossing all those things out the window. So what story does he tell? Do we have a new set of, another young individual who's strong with the Force? Are we going to be looking at the Force in a much different way, and perhaps it being utilized in a different way in a different part of the galaxy that we've seen before? Again, it really got my mind thinking that this is going to be really, really fascinating to find out what Rian Johnson ends up doing. I imagine, and this is not hard to predict, but I imagine, because of what we know of Rian Johnson, at the center of this thing is going to be a very character-driven storyline. That's not to say the original trilogies weren't. They were, but in a sense of the way that Rian Johnson has handled other movies, I'm looking forward to seeing what characters and what dynamic and what conflicts he creates to build this new universe that we've never seen before. All that being said, it's going to be a really, really risky move. It's kind of even riskier than the spinoff films, and I think it's even riskier than what we anticipate the Game of Thrones guys are going to do with their series of movies, because I'm going to venture a guess that that's going to be pre The Phantom Menace by a long, long time, right? The Sith have been extinct for millennia. I'm guessing that that's what that film series is going to be. But even then, you have a bit of an expectation because of what we know from the expanded universe, what we know from what is Legends now, and even though they're not going to be copying that verbatim, I imagine they're going to be drawing a lot from that. You know, a time when there was perhaps an army of Sith, and even a time of the Jedi in a better place than even they were come the Phantom Menace. And so you can sort of get at least a general idea. You know, Rian Johnson's got this whole brand new thing that he's going to create, and I'm certain it's going to be unique and different, but in terms of expectation, is the audience going to be ready beyond you and beyond me to accept something that we have never seen before in the Star Wars universe? I mean, that's really what we're talking about. With Solo, when we know the time period it's set in and we know the dynamics of what's going on within the galaxy. Same thing with Rogue One. Here you have, depending on what timeline he ends up choosing, this trilogy that's just going to be a brand new special thing. I'm obviously super excited for it. I think it's a huge, massive risk on Disney's part, but obviously they've got a lot of faith in him, and I firmly believe that they should. And just to put a bow on this particular conversation and move on, Rian Johnson is right to ignore the fans and to do what he wants to do. And I think that this new trilogy is probably going to end up surprising a lot of people, because he's not going to be tied down to having to do anything that even remotely resembles what the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, or the sequel trilogy did. All right, so let's go ahead and let's switch gears.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
All right, speaking of Disney, Lucasfilm, the galaxy, what to expect moving forward, article I have here in front of me, written by Ben Pearson. When Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, the theme park lands, open next year at Disneyland and Walt Disney World, the setting will be a planet called Batuu, a therefore unseen area in Star Wars lore that's located on the outer rim of the galaxy far, far away. But now Lucasfilm has revealed that the planet will first appear in a new book before guests get to explore the land up close in the real world. Lucasfilm has unveiled a new excerpt from the forthcoming book, Star Wars Thrawn Alliances, a novel that sees Darth Vader joining forces with Grand Admiral Thrawn and taking on a secret mission. My understanding is this is supposed to take place between seasons 2 and 3 of Rebels. I think that's what I read. It turns out the two of them will be visiting Batuu, and it appears that they both have some history there. In the book, Emperor Palpatine assigns Vader and Thrawn to deal with a disturbance in the Force located on the edge of the galaxy. Here's a quick excerpt from the book. You surprised me, Admiral Thrawn, Palpatine said. I would have expected a certain eagerness to journey within sight of your home. Thrawn's glowing red eyes narrowed slightly, and Palpatine felt his sudden caution. Excuse me, Your Majesty? The disturbance is located at the edge of your unknown regions, the Emperor said. It appears to be centered on the planet named Batuu. Again, he sensed a reaction to the name. This time, the reaction came from both of them. I believe you've heard of it? Thrawn's eyes were hooded, the expression on that blue-skinned face swirling with memories. Yes, he murmured, I have indeed heard of it. As, of course, had Vader. It was the place where he and Thrawn had long ago interfered, albeit unwittingly, with one of Palpatine's plans. But again, Vader remained silent. Very well then, Palpatine said. You, Admiral, will command. He looked at Vader. You, Lord Vader, will deal with the disturbance. Yes, Your Highness, Thrawn said. Yes, my master, Vader said. Palpatine leaned back into the depths of his throne. Then go. The two servants turned and walked towards the door between the double line of the red-cloaked Imperial guards, slightly lining their path. Palpatine watched them go. The chiss in his white a Grand Admiral's uniform, the Sith garbed in black, his long cloak swirling behind him. The solution to this particular puzzle would indeed require both of them. More importantly, it would address Palpatine's lingering questions. He smiled thinly. Time for Thrawn to face his future. Time for Vader to face his past. So Thrawn, Star Wars Thrawn Alliances will be on the bookshelves on July 24th. We'll have to wait until then to get a better idea, the article says, to the extent of Batu's involvement in the story. Here's how StarWars.com describes Batu. A remote outpost on Galaxy's Edge, Batu was once a busy crossroads in the days prior to Lightspeed. With the rise of hyperspace travel, however, the world, notable for its lush trees and mountain spikes that decorate its surface, was left behind, its performance lost to planets on more popular trade routes. Today, Batu is home to those who prefer to stay out of the mainstream, and a thriving port for smugglers, rogue traders, and adventurers traveling between the frontier and uncharted space. Significantly, it has also become a safe haven for those looking to avoid the attention of the First Order. So I find this interesting from this angle, that I wish that I could be a fly on the wall, or at least tour Lucasfilm to see what they have planned out. When the announcement was made about Jon Favreau doing the live-action TV show, a lot of different commentators on podcasts who were well-connected within Hollywood had said that they'd heard about this rumor for a long, long time. We know that there is allegedly at least a partial script, or the makings of a script, for an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie. The Game of Thrones individuals being hired to direct a series of films has also been known for a while. When Rian Johnson was announced that he was going to be, doing Episode 8, I mean, that was, we were still sort of in the productions of The Last Jedi. So all of this is to say that Disney and Lucasfilm have a plan for this franchise, and I believe this plan for the franchise is their attempts to develop their own type of Star Wars cinematic universe. Now, we already have that with the movies that we have so far, but I think the intention will definitely be moving forward of trying to make it as interconnected as possible in a different way than what they've done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And the inclusion of Batu in the Thrawn novel and the unknown regions, and of course the speculation that that's where Snoke has been this whole time, begins to sort of lean us into this idea of how everything is going to be interconnected and what eventually will play out on the big screen. The books, the TV shows, those tie-ins will be there, but they won't be the major tie-ins. They're going to need these things in the films for the casual audience, for it to really, really work. I do expect that there'll be some connections being made in the Solo movie. I do expect that at some point in time we're going to get the backstory of Snoke in a major way, and I think I want to say that's part of the reason why Rian Johnson didn't give the backstory in The Last Jedi. I think that what Rian Johnson did came first. I think Rian Johnson decided that he wasn't going to give the backstory of Snoke, despite the fact that more than likely it's already been written when J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan wrote The Force Awakens. But when Rian Johnson decided that he wasn't going to make a big deal about it, and as a matter of fact killed this character off, I think that's when Disney and Lucasfilm ended up giving themselves license to give us the backstory in some other capacity someplace else. And I firmly believe that's going to happen. And it may not have happened necessarily if Rian Johnson had given us the full backstory to Snoke. It may end up in the live-action TV show. I still think that there's a slight possibility that Snoke could make a brief appearance in the Solo movie, and that's based off of the fact that Lawrence Kasdan wrote Solo, a Star Wars story, before he worked with J.J. Abrams and wrote The Force Awakens. So it would make sense that if there was some connection to Snoke, especially with Han Solo, that he would have had a Snoke in that script in some capacity. And I think that when you see something like Batuu and this being sort of Galaxy's Edge, I think that Galaxy's Edge was already a part of their larger plan of expanding the universe. And so when they decided to go ahead and make the theme parks, hey, we'll make it Batuu. We already have this particular location. It's in the unknown regions. We're going to use it in this, and we're going to use it in this. And so it makes sense to go to the parks and go ahead and use it in that.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
I want to add a few comments to something that I said on last week's show, but I don't think I completely got into it. I think I ended up going off on some tangent. Shocking, right? But I made a comment last week watching The Director and the Jedi and the making of features of The Last Jedi, of how many, the record number of sets that they used and the amount of practical effects. I mean, all the way to the point where they took the space cow, hung it from the bottom of a helicopter, or flew it out to a cliff in Ireland, all to get the shot of Luke milking the space cow with the green milk and then, drinking it down as if it were fanboy tears who were upset because they didn't like the way that Rian Johnson went and created this movie. And I don't know if I landed on it last week, and I didn't get a chance to go back and listen to it, but I want to make sure that I made this point. There is something that is very special about The Last Jedi in the same way that the original trilogy was so special to all of us in how far they went to push the envelope of practical effects and how far they went to create those sets and to making the hut explode during the finger touching scene. And again, the space cow and the environments that they were all in. And every opportunity that they had to build a physical set and do a practical physical effect, they took advantage of it, even in ways that they didn't have to. And I really do feel as if it adds to that unique, tangible that was missing, again, and I mentioned this last week, from the prequel trilogy. Even though they had, don't misunderstand, I know they had a ton of sets, and that the Force Awakens had more in terms of CGI than the entire prequel trilogy. I get it. But there are clearly those scenes in the prequel trilogy where it's just, the sets just are non-existent because they painted them and the effects weren't there yet, and it really takes you out. They could have easily, and probably in a better way, when it comes to the space cow on Octo that Luke milks, they could have done that CGI and actually maybe made it look better. But I like the fact that I know it's physically there. It really adds something unique and special. When you go and you look at the Praetorian Guard fight with Kylo and with Rey, I mean, you watch the making of that and how much in camera they shot. It just looks spectacular because of it. And it has that very unique, tangible quality the original trilogy had. And to me, it's what's going to make that, it's what is going to make that movie timeless, in my opinion. I mean, on top of the fact that we are looking at something that's set in a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But there's something very different about the fandom, and something very important when it comes to the Star Wars fandom that transcends the movies. And that is being able to see the practical and the physical on screen, and the way that we connect to that as individuals watching something on a screen. But that also translates to how so many of us want to take this home. And like I talked about, having the physical copy of the movie or having my collectibles. I know not everybody's that way. I mean, some people do it with books. I like having the tangible. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of my computer with all my software running, and I've got my Black Series figures right above me on the shelf, and I'm staring at Kylo and Rey and BB-8 and a Praetorian Guard and a First Order Trooper and Phasma. Right? I love to be surrounded by these things that I love, and I like to be able to touch them. There's something about that physical quality, and I think it's a lot of the same way that we relate to the movies and the physical quality of those movies as well. One more quick point on The Last Jedi. I want to talk a little bit about characters I want to see on the big screen, a little bit about Solo, and then we'll dive into a long show this week, by the way. We'll dive into the listener feedback. Got a lot to cover on listener feedback. One more quick point. And I titled the show this week, You're Nothing, right? You're nothing but not to me. I titled the show that this week just because I wanted to make this point. And I know that I've spent a lot of time talking about this, especially this moment in other shows. It's arguably my favorite moment in all of Star Wars, at least for now. Right? These are sliding. These are favorite moments that change depending on mood and what's coming out and this kind of stuff. At the moment, post that battle with the Praetorian Guards. And Kylo does his let it all die and then does the, you're no one, you're nothing, but not to me. I love that moment. I really, really do. And I love that moment because to me, it's the fulfillment of what Rian Johnson said about making these characters relatable and how when it comes to Darth Vader, you couldn't really relate to him all that much. Kylo Ren you can relate to, given the circumstances that he's gone through. None of that doesn't justify the horrible things he's done, but you can relate to it. You can also relate to a person like Rey, much in the same way you can with Luke Skywalker. But the writing in that moment, and every time I watch it, it guts me. This you're nothing, but not to me. It's so relatable because don't we all kind of feel that way sometimes? Right? Hopefully not, right? Hopefully we have that thing in our lives that fills us with joy, whether it's somebody else, whether it's our religion, right? And the beliefs and the faith that we cling to. But we all have those moments where you kind of feel like you're nothing, right? So much going on in the world, and even when you've got a bunch of people around you, you can still feel lonely. What I like about that moment, though, is that, Kylo does that. It's almost a really cruel thing to say, right? I mean, it is a cruel thing to say. You're nothing. But then to follow it up with, but not to me, it makes that moment so much, it makes it so much deeper and so conflicting. Because imagine if you're Rey in that moment and you're being told you're nothing, right? You're having this conversation about how your parents sold you off for drinking money. You're nothing, but you're not to me. And that's all you need is somebody there to acknowledge you and to want to be with you and to be meaningful to you. You want to be meaningful for somebody the way that people are meaningful for you. And I love the way he wrote that scene because it's kind of like a you're nothing. It's like, wow, you're awful. But then you follow that up with a but not to me. And that's where the conflict arises. And if you're Rey, how difficult is that? Because Kylo's kind of got a point. She kind of got sucked into this. And when you think about the timeline of the way things had played out, she hasn't been on this adventure for very long, right? She doesn't really know all these people yet very well. And the guy that she was trying to get to join the fight, Luke Skywalker, bailed on her and didn't want to do it. So she had to take matters into her own hands to a person that she's already obviously physically attracted to. So I just wanted to stop down for a moment, and I probably repeated what myself in talking about that scene before, but I saw a cartoon. If you've seen the little cartoons of a young Kylo and a young Rey, and the cartoon is Kylo holding up a piece of paper saying, I wrote you a Valentine, and it's blank. And Rey in the cartoon goes, but it's nothing. And Kylo just goes, exactly. That cartoon cracks me up, but it reminded me of that scene. And in thinking about wanting to talk about something when it comes to The Last Jedi this week, that's the one thing that I wanted to zero in on. So, yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and let's move on to other things, shall we? this probably belonged in the conversation that I was having with you about the future of the franchise. But if anybody asks me what characters have not appeared on the big screen do I want to see on the big screen portrayed, it would be Ahsoka and Hera. And I don't know in what capacity. I don't know in what storyline. I mean, I'd love to see a movie version of what picks up at the end of Rebels. And for those that haven't seen it, I won't ruin it. But I really do think those are amazing characters, and I would love to see them in some capacity on the big screen. It doesn't have to be a movie centered around either of those characters, but I love Hera. I think that is a fantastic character. She's my favorite character of Rebels. Ahsoka's my favorite character of Clone Wars, and arguably my favorite character outside of the movies themselves. I just think that Ahsoka is a fantastic character, and they'd have to pull it off carefully to make it work on the big screen. But I would love to see those characters on the big screen at some point in the near future. I just think that would be spectacular. All right, before we get to listener feedback, let's talk just a little bit of Solo, a Star Wars story.
I've been running scams on the street since I was 10. I was kicked out of the flight academy for having a mind of my own.
Hey, kid. I'm putting together a crew. You in?
That's yes.
I might be the only person. Who knows what you really are?
What's that?
Get ready.
Thought we were in trouble there for a second, but it's fine. We're fine.
Your name?
I need help.
So now that we are almost to Avengers Infinity War, they had the trailer that dropped, tickets are on sale. Collider Jedi Council announced that on April 2nd, they are going to be, that's a Monday, they're going to be doing their show, a Jedi Council from a Denny's in Los Angeles. And in that Denny's it sounds really weird, doesn't it? That Denny's in Los Angeles, they're going to be tying in a bunch of promotion for Solo, a Star Wars story. I've actually seen online already some of the promotional materials from Denny's for Solo. They're going to be doing some themed meals, and they'll be doing some specials around Solo, a Star Wars story. I imagine that sometime around that week, April 2nd, we're going to get the full trailer for Solo, a Star Wars story. And I also imagine that we are all going to be wow and amazed. If we weren't overly enthusiastic over the two sort of mini teasers, the mini trailers that we got, the teaser trailers, I wasn't really all that enthusiastic, and I've mentioned this before, over the first Last Jedi one. They know they have to bring it and deliver it with this full trailer, and I absolutely believe that they will. I am fascinated to see what the promotional campaign for this movie is going to be like. Went out and saw Pacific Rim Uprising on Friday with Kyle, my 11-year-old, and they had the big. I think I tweeted it out. If not, I'll tweet it out. I thought I did. Maybe I Instagrammed it. Anyways, if you follow me on Twitter at Jon Justice, you'll find it there whenever I'll make sure I'll double check it when I get done with the show this week. But they had the big, huge Millennium Falcon cockpit display standee there. It looked amazing. And once that full trailer hits, anybody thinking that they're not doing any promotion, you just wait. They're going to go full speed ahead with promotion for Solo, a Star Wars story. And I'm getting really, really excited. On a different level than we do for the saga movies, but I'm getting really, really excited for Solo, a Star Wars story, because I think it's just going to be a really, really fun movie. And We need that. Let me rephrase. I love Rogue One. I think it's a fantastic film. It's not necessarily like fun, right? Star Wars is fun. Some movies are darker than others, but Star Wars movies are fun. And that movie it's a really, really good time, but I'm ready for something not necessarily comedic, but just a real fun adventure a la like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones. And I really feel like that's what we're going to get with Solo: A Star Wars Story. And I can't wait until that full trailer drops so that I can come on here and talk about it with you. So there has been some toy leaks. Some toys have already been hitting the stores, but there's not a ton to glean from any of those. And it's mostly because of the fact that we are looking at this as a spin-off movie and not a saga film. And so when it comes to the deep, rich mythology that we like to dive into and spend hours talking about, you don't really get that when it comes to the spin-off movies the way you do the saga films. And so they're cool to look at, and it's nice to look at those pictures and see that that's money that I'm not going to have once they hit store shelves. But other than that, there's not a ton to go and talk about, except to say that I'm getting excited for Solo: A Star Wars Story. Really curious to see how Disney and Lucasfilm handle the campaign when it comes to this movie and what its success will mean for the future of the franchise. All right, so let's get into it. You've reached out to me, and it's time for me to respond to you.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
So, first off, big, huge thank you for what is quickly becoming my favorite part of the show every week, and that is the listener feedback portion of the show. So I've got a whole bunch, and again, thank you so much for writing in, and just want to dive right into it. And we'll start off with Gen X 7 says, I'm appreciative that you as a podcaster actually just appreciates Star Wars instead of sitting back and bitching about it. Love the show, love The Last Jedi. Also got one from Melissa. Says, thank you for your positive podcast concerning The Last Jedi. Finally, someone who gets it. Rian Johnson did a fantastic job. Look, to both of those, I'm kind of with you. I'm over the negativity. And it's been really weird listening to a few of the shows that I do on a weekly basis. And a lot of shows are dealing with the conflict, and I guess it's a luxury and a curse that I do the show alone. I mean, it would be nice to have somebody to do the show with, and I was doing it with my weekly radio partners, Drew and Sam, but the reality was they just weren't keeping up with the news and getting into the intricacies like I was, and so it's better for now for me to be doing the show solo. It would be great one day to have somebody who I could do the show with that kind of gets into it the way that I get into it. But it's interesting listening to some other shows because there's a lot of conflict going on because they're talking about the digital release and the physical release coming up this week and the novel. And there are individuals on these shows that clearly have no desire to see the movie again because they fall into that category of not liking it, borderline hating it. And everybody's entitled to their opinion, but it's made for some really, I don't want to say boring shows, but just some really conflicted shows because it's clear that they're having a hard time working through some of the material because half of the cast, if not the other co-host, doesn't like this movie. And even was it last week? I think it was last week on Collider Jedi Council. And I love the stuff that Collider does. Collider Movie Talk and all their different shows and Jedi Council, Ken Knapsack and Christian Harloff and all those guys. I dig those guys. But I think it was last week. I mean, Christian spent all this time just talking about all the things that he says that Rian Johnson did wrong. And again, it all just comes down to the wording, right? In my opinion, it's not stuff that he did wrong. It's just stuff that you didn't like because it's so subjective. So, I'm glad that for those of you that have found the show and appreciate it, that it's filling a need for you in listening to a Star Wars show, somebody that just that loves these films. They're not perfect by any stretch, but I do love The Last Jedi. So thank you for both of those, both Gen X 7 and Melissa. Jana Jana, I'm probably making that too complicated, says perfect metaphor in talking about The Last Jedi being a love letter from last week. It's exactly like a love letter. Great podcast. I truly enjoy your point of view. Thank you, Jana. Miss Suki, 777, says, do you think that JJ's 9 will try to be more of a people-pleaser film like TFA? Or do you think he will carry on from Rian Johnson's 8? Also, do you think JJ will be brave enough to go through with Kylo/Ben's relationship, which was the best part of The Last Jedi, in my opinion? Great show as usual. I think that J.J. Abrams and 9 will be more of a people-pleaser, but not intentionally so. I do consider J.J. Abrams to be a fantastic director. I've loved every movie that he has made. I really have. They're infinitely watchable. And that's the kind of movie that J.J. Abrams makes. That's the kind of movie that J.J. Abrams likes. I had a concern going into The Last Jedi. So let me answer the question by going this route. I had a concern going into The Last Jedi because Rian Johnson's taste in movies is very eclectic. The movies that he has made so far are rather eclectic. They are not your mainstream movies. Brick is a divisive film. I didn't care for Brick. I thought it was boring. I know a lot of people really liked Brick. That wasn't me. I really liked Brothers Bloom. On a second viewing, I need to watch it again because I watched it for a third time. I watched it a third time with my wife, Melinda. And I remember watching it with her. My opinion of the film shifted a little bit because I think she was getting bored with it. And I wanted her to like it. And you've been in those circumstances before when you're watching a movie that you really want your friend or whomever to really like, but then you can tell they're just not getting it, and it's kind of a bummer because you almost feel bad for them because you've gotten so much joy out of it. You want them to get joy out of it. So, Brothers Bloom was a very, very different film as well. I really, really like Looper a lot. But going into The Last Jedi, I knew that we had a director in Rian Johnson who had a very different taste in movies. I believe that J.J. Abrams' taste in films is a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more like the movies that he makes. So I didn't know what to expect from a Rian Johnson movie. And I think it's because of Rian Johnson's taste in films. If you look at his Twitter feed or his Instagram and see the pop culture and movie references that he constantly puts out there, it's not your run-of-the-mill standard stuff. I mean, it's pretty deep album tracks of movies. And I think that's what ended up lending itself, being The Last Jedi, to being such a great film, but also why it was so divisive for so many people. Rian Johnson made a movie that he wanted to make that was going to delight him and bring him joy. Therefore, it was going to be different regardless. There was the fact that he was making the movie that way, it was destined to be different. And I think in the long run, and we'll get to one of the comments coming up here that I absolutely agree with from Jedi Mind Trick, but in the long run, I think it is going to be one of the best held Star Wars movies next to The Empire Strikes Back. I think of revered Star Wars films, with it being so divisive, the love and the fandom of The Last Jedi, I think, is only going to grow. And I'll just use myself as an example, because every single weekend it seems as if I tell myself I'm going to take a break from watching this movie, and yet I find myself gravitating towards it because I want to go in and watch it again. So, again, Miss Suki, 777, that's a long way to say, yes, I do think Episode 9 is going to be more sort of viewer accessible. It's going to be a little bit more mainstream, but I think that's not out of a genuine desire to make it mainstream. I think that's specifically out of the way that J.J. Abrams makes movies and what delights him versus what delights a director like Rian Johnson. So Julie writes, I get what you mean. I loved the movie, but the first time I watched it, I felt like someone ripped out my heart and tore it to pieces. I loved it, but it made me feel so much it was kind of painful. You need to appreciate a movie that can make you feel that way. I have so much respect for everyone who created The Last Jedi. Thanks again for your podcast. It's always a pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much, Julie. I really do, I really do appreciate that. Elle writes, I agree that The Last Jedi is a love letter. It might not be in the form some fans wanted, but it still came from a place of love, and it will stand the test of time. And we are definitely headed to Ben Solo's redemption, says Elle. It's the reason Ben was written as an only child, to raise the stakes for his character. If there had been any other kids to carry on the Skywalker line, Ben's future wouldn't be so important. I thought it was noteworthy that in the opening dream in the novelization, the author made a point of saying that Luke had never had any children, so the Skywalker bloodline would have died with Luke had he not gone on his hero's journey and rescued Leia. Ben will have to become his best self to convince Rey to become his wife and the mother of his children. It's dramatic, I know, but in a story with both royal and magical lineages, it fits. Let me back up here real quick, because I forgot to answer the second part of Miss Suki 777's comment, and then I'll spin it back to Elle's comment. The second part of her comment, which I realized in the middle of reading the recent one, was, do you think JJ will be brave enough to go through with the Kylo Ben relationship, which was the best part of The Last Jedi? I hope so. I don't know, but I hope so. With the foundation that Rian Johnson laid out, it's obviously ripe to do something extraordinary with these two characters based off of what he put them through in The Last Jedi. I'll also reiterate what I said on a previous show, and that is I trust whatever they're going to do, regardless of what happens in Episode 9, we'll always have Episode 8. And Episode 8 did a really, really good job of giving a lot of us maybe what we wanted, or maybe not even realize that we wanted until we got it, in that connection between Kylo Ren and Rey, between Ben Solo and Rey. Which, look, when watching the movie for the first time, that was way more than I could have expected. I couldn't believe he actually went there and he did it. So regardless of what they do in 9, we'll always have 8. I think that J.J. Abrams is brave enough to do it, but I do think that J.J. Abrams will do it in a very J.J. Abrams kind of way. And look, J.J. handles these types of relationships really, really well. When you look at Star Trek Into Darkness, I really enjoyed the frustration between Spock and Youre. Am I getting that right? Am I saying that right? I know my Star Trek. Why am I blanking on me? Anyways, I really enjoyed the conflict that they had in that movie. At the same time, Super 8. My favorite moment of the movie Super 8 is the moment when the girl comes over to the kid's house at night, tapping on the door, and they have that moment where they're just sitting down on the floor, and he's leaning up against his bed, and she's talking about how she hardly knows him, but it feels like she's known him forever. Does he feel that way? And he says, yes, I can't believe we're actually having this conversation right now. He handles relationships, young and old, really, really well. Getting back to Elle's comment about Ben Solo and his redemption. Yeah, I don't disagree. I think he is on a path to redemption. I think the question just revolves around whether or not J.J. Abrams takes it in a way, and I went into great deal about this last week. J.J. Abrams takes it in a direction of putting Ben and Rey together and fulfilling his arc that way to where he's fully redeemed and living, or whether that redemption comes at great sacrifice. And I think that really remains to be seen. Kylo Ren is going to have to be evil. I mean, he is evil, but he's going to be evil in the next movie. And by the end of The Last Jedi, he was, as I've said, downright lethal. I mean, he was at all. He wanted Luke dead. He wanted the First Order caught. I mean the Resistance, now Rebellion, caught. No quarter. So there's still quite a bit of a journey to take to get to that full redemption. And whether or not, again, that is a full redemption with him living and even potentially being with Rey, or one where he sacrifices, I think that still remains to be seen, and we won't know for a year and a half. All right, Jedi Mind Trick writes, I love this movie from day one. Since its digital release, I've grown to adore it more and more. It's so layered, and the true beauty of it is in its subtlety. The best directed Star Wars film since Empire, maybe even better. I know that's Star Wars blasphemy, but that's coming from an honest place of a fan for over 40 years and someone who has always believed that The Empire Strikes Back is the only perfect film I've ever seen. I effing love this movie. Even the Canto Bite portion gets better for me with time. Jedi Mind Trick, I echo your sentiments, man. I really, really do. I love The Empire Strikes Back. And The Last Jedi is right there next to it for me. It really, really is. The Empire Strikes Back is something truly unique and special. And it's got a lot of things going for it, and had a lot of things going for it. And, next to Star Wars, the original Star Wars, A New Hope, and what it was able to do was truly miraculous. To compare The Last Jedi to The Empire Strikes Back, I think you are looking at, in terms of movie craft, a movie that's on par, if not better. Rian Johnson was so meticulous with The Last Jedi. It's going to be one of those circumstances, and I landed on this, I don't know, about 4 podcasts ago, but I'm done ranking the films for me personally, and it's my love of these movies is going to shift and change with the tides. It really is going to depend. I can put movies in certain categories, and I can kind of tell you this one I like more than this one. But when it comes to the upper echelon of the films, they're going to mean different things to me at different times. Right now, The Last Jedi is my favorite Star Wars movie. If I'm going to sit down and watch a Star Wars movie, that's the one that I'm going to end up gravitating towards. And it is, to me, up there on par with the Empire Strikes Back. And maybe one of these days for one of the shows, I'll take some time, or just take the show talking about the comparisons between Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi. The way that they were shot, the mindset behind them, one could say was drastically different, but one could also say that it was very much the same. And what I mean by that is, obviously, doing episode 8 so many years down the line from doing episode 5, there's just going to be differences just because of the length of time in the filmmaking process and the fandom and how much the franchise has grown. But when you look at the attitude of the directors going into both of these films, but with Irving Kershner and with Rian Johnson, I think there's something to be said there. There's actually quite a few parallels there. So I'm going to jot that down, make a note of it for a future podcast, and spend some time talking about that. All right, let's get to some more comments. This is from Ipani Reads. If I'm saying that wrong, I apologize. You guys all have a bunch of weird YouTube names. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Ipani Reads. ER. We'll call him ER for short. There's a reason Rey is so strong with the Force. She spends a lot of time alone. Being somewhat of a loner myself, there's a lot of time to think about the past, the present, and the future. That's a good point. Rey constantly sees herself as being abandoned, past. She constantly sees her parents coming back to her future. This girl has a lot of meditating time on her hands, and after what Obi-Wan Kenobi says in A New Hope, the Force will be with you always, Rey's only true companion at all this time is the Force. Why wouldn't it latch onto her and keep her alive? That's a great point. I'm not sure I'm going to have fun watching these movies anymore with all these hateful voices out there shouting so loud, so I'm glad this channel exists. Maybe those guys will win because I'm exhausted and rubbed raw. I'm fighting so hard for this movie because I never admitted I liked the prequels. Yes, even Jar Jar Binks. Oh, great, here come the hecklers. Kudos to Ryan. He could have been starstruck, bowed down to Mark Hamill, but he took the advice to stand his ground. And when you're the manager, you don't make friends, you guide employees. Boy, there's a lot to unpack there from Ipani Reads. There's a lot to get to with that. Let me focus on two things here, and that is the hateful voices and fighting back. I'm done. Me personally, I'm done trying to defend this movie. I don't need to defend this movie. If people don't like it, they don't have to like it. That's on them, and that's a bummer for them that they don't enjoy it. But it is all selective. I found there was somebody following me on Twitter, and again, I'm using now at the My Nerd World for My Nerd World on Twitter now. So I hope you have a chance to find me and follow me. But I was following, it was just a particular Star Wars channel. They posted something that kind of caught my eye because it was rather negative. And then I went to their Twitter profile, their feed, and read just these, I don't know, it was like 10 tweets breaking down all of the reasons why they didn't like The Last Jedi. It was so mundane and so tedious. And what it amounted to, look, and to each their own, their opinion, whatever, but what all of it amounted to was it didn't go the way that they wanted it to go. It really wasn't about the filmmaking or whether or not the story was bad. It was just, the the story didn't play out the way that they thought it should play out. And I'm going to bring this up again. Okay, I'm going to bring it up again for those that haven't heard it. But it's one of my favorite, my apologies to, I think it was 1138. You spelled that out at 1138 on Twitter. Their pinned tweet is a GIF file of Luke at the end of Return of the Jedi when he has his lights. And I didn't even think about this. And again, I mentioned it earlier in the show, but I'm going to say it again. I didn't even think about this when I saw it. But at the end of Return of the Jedi, the lightsaber, the green one, right? What does he do with it? He throws it aside. Chucks it. I'm a Jedi. Clunk. Like my father before me. Luke took his saber and threw it. It makes me laugh when everybody got so bent out of shape at the beginning of The Last Jedi for Luke tossing his saber over his shoulder. Well, yeah. He got rid of his other saber. He didn't want that one either. Now, granted, he took it at the end of Return of the Jedi, and he had it, and we saw it in the when he ignites the green during the flashback scene in The Last Jedi. But the point being is that that's not the first time that Luke's taken a lightsaber and thrown it. I really think it just came down to the way that he threw it. I think if Luke had just dropped it on the ground or handed it back, I don't think people would have reacted the way that they reacted. But because he tossed it over his shoulder, people thought it was wacky. But it really wasn't all that different from what he did at the end of Return of the Jedi when he tossed it aside. And as a matter of fact, if he had tossed it aside the same way that he did in Return of the Jedi, people would have just said, oh, Rian Johnson just copied what he did in Return of the Jedi. That was a really long way for me to say that I'm done sort of fighting against the haters. I just kind of watch from the outside, read their tweets and mock them or unfollow accounts because I just think they're idiots. To the Mark Hamill and the director in the Jedi that I spent time talking about last week, it's funny. I went back and I watched the director in the Jedi again, and I noted I wish I had the audio to share with you. There's a moment during the director in the Jedi where you hear Mark Hamill, and he's talking about, I think he's talking about controversy and feedback and all that, and he mentioned, he was talking about training. In the director in the Jedi, there's a couple of moments where they talk about the fight between Rey and Luke. With the sticks, right before Rey force grabs the lightsaber there. Did you create Kylo Ren? This is not going to go the way you think. That whole scene.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Well, Mark Hamill, apparently wasn't too keen on doing all of the lightsaber or the fighting. He felt it was better. He said he didn't have a big ego, so big of an ego that a stunt person couldn't come in and take care of doing some of the harder work because he's an older man now. And Ron Bergman, the producer, and another one of the guys on the staff was talking about how they were going to train Luke for the entire fight, and then they would decide which moments they would switch out with potentially a stunt guy. And Ron was talking about, Mark Hamill needs to understand that really if he does it, it makes it so much better. But there's a moment when Mark Hamill comments about tweeting to fans, hearing from fans expectations, and how that was a concern of him. This is why I am so happy that Rian Johnson stuck to his guns and didn't cave on what he wanted to do with the story. Because when you start making decisions based off what you think the fans want, that's when you make mistakes. I firmly believe that J.J. Abrams dodged a big bullet with The Force Awakens. I love The Force Awakens. I adore that movie. I understand the complaints that some people have, that it's a bit of a retread over the whole original trilogy. There are many parallels, but there are in all Star Wars movies. I don't particularly have a problem with it. But when you start making decisions based off what you think the fans want, that's when you're going to make mistakes. And that's where I think maybe there wouldn't have been the backlash that there was had Rian Johnson treated Luke maybe the way that Mark Hamill did, maybe the way that the portion of the fandom that was mad that he died, spoiler alert, and the way that he was handled being more Obi-Wan Kenobi than Luke Skywalker in this film. But I guarantee you, if they had gone the other route, the way that Mark Hamill wanted, or the way that the portion of the fandom that's mad about the way that Luke was handled, they had gone that route, the movie would not have been nearly as strong, nearly as noteworthy, and nearly as popular in the long run. Because it would have been what everybody expected, and so there wouldn't have been any challenging. There wouldn't have been any conflict. That was a very realistic way to handle Luke Skywalker. That's exactly what would have happened. That one Twitter page I was telling you about, the part of their rant against what they did with the story was talking about how he was so mad that Luke was a broken man in this movie. Well, that happens. We don't always remain heroes. We make mistakes. We're flawed individuals. Yes, even in a galaxy far, far away. It makes all the sense in the world to me that Luke would consider in that brief moment that, that flashed by, to take out Kylo Ren would have been the best thing to do. Did he? No, he second-guessed it. But unfortunately, he had to live with the consequences of even venturing into that thought process. And at the end of the movie, what do we get? We get Luke being the bad A that everybody wanted, in a way that Luke would have been. He wouldn't have been there duking it out with a lightsaber, one-on-one with Kylo and besting him. No, he threw his lightsaber away. I'm a Jedi like my father before me, right? We can't fight a war for you. This kind of thing. So, okay, that was a long, long answer to that particular comment. Let's get to some more emails. All right. Here's a long one. Lindsay writes, really great comments for the listener feedback portion this week. Speaking of last week, I have so many thoughts. I love looking at Star Wars in relationship to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Glad I'm not the only one doing so. It makes me hopeful that Ben can get a happily ever after. We already saw redemption through sacrifice with Anakin and Vader. Interesting note. In storytelling, we are usually only shown something more than once in order to highlight the differences in the outcome. Also interesting. And with the sheer amount of parallels we see between Ben and Anakin, as well as Rey and Padme for that matter, the end for Kylo Ren's story needs to be different from Vader's. If he doesn't finish Anakin's hero's journey and bring peace and closure to the galaxy line, then this would go directly against the basics of storytelling, in my opinion. Ben will bring this saga full circle. I would love to have a scene in 9 of Ben saving a group of children while on the redemption path. Oh, man, Lindsay, you're hitting all the buttons here. Killing younglings is arguably the worst thing we see Anakin do, and it would make for a great illustration of the reverse Anakin imagery we have seen throughout the sequel trilogy so far. I'm so here for all the parallels we saw to the prequels in The Last Jedi. Let me stop here real quick. The one thing that I mentioned, and this is probably not a big deal because I even forgot about it, even in all the dissecting that I've done of these films, but I think we should also remember that it wasn't just, say, like Lor San Tekka, or when Kylo puts his helmet in the kitty litter in the Force Awakens. We've been told, even though I don't think it's canon, like in a book, it might be in the book in the book version, but we were told that was like the ashes of his enemy. We know that he ordered for all the villagers to be killed, right? The one thing I wanted to mention that doesn't get talked about very often, though, is that he did murder the Padawans in Luke's academy, right? So, Anakin killed those younglings, which is still, every time I watch Return of the Jedi now, especially, getting older and having kids, I kind of go, oh, that's really awful. But be that as it may, Kylo did take out the other kids in that academy. I mean, we saw their bodies lying down. So, again, another parallel, but in terms of redemption and all the horrible things on the list that Kylo's done, I think that needs to be tossed in there. We've kind of forget about that, and it's not really drawn upon, so even if that's never addressed later on, I don't think it will be an issue when it comes to a full redemption of Ben, but that is sort of lingering out there. All right, getting back to Lindsay's comment here. I also really love that you pointed out Han Solo's death is made meaningless without redemption. This is something I think about all the time. I wouldn't be surprised if part of the motivation for Lucasfilm making Solo is to get the audience even more in a headspace that by the end of 9, Han Solo's sacrifice will really mean something. Yeah, I hope that there are connections in Solo to the sequel trilogy that maybe we weren't even aware could happen. Right? I'd love to see some commentary or some dialogue from Han Solo talking about growing older and, maybe having a son, that portion of him. I mean, handled correctly, but I would love to see Solo give us more background, obviously on Han Solo, but something that we can chew on as fans, not having the Force theme and the saga behind this film. It'd be great if there was some nice key moments that directly related to the sequel trilogy. Let's see here. And with the dice scene at the end of The Last Jedi, there's no doubt for me that Ben has finally begun to see that his actions have pushed away his loved ones. The intimacy he shared with Rey slips through his fingers just like those dice, and he knows it's his own fault. Lastly, I wanted to note that I watched The Director and the Jedi at your recommendation, and it was fantastic. Gave me lots of insight into the film. Thanks, and keep up the great work. Thank you, Lindsay. That was a great. There's a lot of great thoughts in there. All right. Let's get to Amanda. Amanda writes this, talking about Hamill, Lucas, and Johnson, the origin of the return of Obi-Wan, adding something to what another stated about the expectation running. Is it ruining The Last Jedi? Ruining The Last Jedi. I too was deeply troubled to see the actor struggle with so much with the course of this film, and how he kept stating that his interpretation of Luke was fundamentally flawed. He kept his word that he did his best, being Mark Hamill, and delivered a wonderful performance of Johnson's vision. But he didn't let the audience decide. He provided plenty of ammo for distracted fans to fire back at Johnson and Disney. And truth be told, Lucas would have gone in a similar path with Johnson. Lucas, in the book of The Art of the Last Jedi, there's a note that Lucas losing his faith was part of the original plan. He even told Mark this would happen in the 80s. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's some pieces of art talking about the sort of the Jedi Temple that's supposed to be on Octu, however you want to say it. And in it talks about how this was George Lucas's plan for Luke, and of course it was. But look, make no mistake. I think that if George Lucas had done these films and done that with Luke, the fans would have been just as ticked off. There's no way to ever know if that's the case. But it wasn't. That's the funny thing too. It's everybody got mad at George Lucas for the prequels. Oh, okay, not everybody. The people that didn't like the prequels got mad at George Lucas because of the prequels, right? Okay. So then we get The Force Awakens, and you get some talk about what if Lucas had done it, and suddenly he's popular again. And then you get these other series. You get like Rebels, and I hear people complain about sort of it's losing the luster because Lucas isn't there. And then of course you get The Last Jedi, and I hear people upset that Lucas wasn't involved in this wasn't his vision. But these are the same people that probably didn't like the prequels and were bemoaning any potential involvement of Lucas moving forward anyways. And so I really don't think that if Lucas had done this film and done the same thing, they would be any more happy, right, about the decision. And again, it's all subjective. All right, thank you Amanda for the email this week. Really appreciate it. All right, Zach writes, "Hey John, this is Zach, big fan of yours. Listen on YouTube as much as possible, and I know that you're a fan of romantic arcs in Star Wars. When I was just sitting down one night typing about my feelings toward the entire Star Wars saga in general, I made an observation about the romantic pairings of each trilogy, as well as some of the EU pairings. When I compared the names of romantic interests, an interesting pattern appeared. In a number of the letters, the names of the partners don't match up. Their relationship either failed completely or just eventually. First off, Anakin and Padme. It ended super tragically, and their numbers did not balance. Second, we have Han and Leia. Yes, their relationship did work for a time, but it eventually failed. Again, the numbers are imbalanced. When we look at Kylo, Ben, and Rey, when the Kylo persona is dominant, the couple's interactions don't end well. However, when he acts as Ben Solo, that's when Rey wants to pursue a relationship with him. Interesting. when we do the number crunching before Kylo and Rey equal imbalance. If we use the same equation with Ben and Rey, we get a different result. Balance. I applied the same idea to two EU couples and found the same thing. Revan and Bastila have a relationship for a while, but end tragically. Luke and Mara, or Mara Jade, however you want to pronounce that, have a successful relationship, and I believe that this relationship has similarities to Kylo, to Reylo, are the reason why it worked. I don't feel I have discovered some hidden secret to romance in the Star Wars saga, and I don't imply that any of these similarities were thought out ahead of time. However, I did at least discover a thought-provoking coincidence. I just wanted to say thanks for all that you do. The Star Wars fan base needs more positivity right now. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the theory, or at least find something interesting in it. All the best, Zach. No, I do. I find something really, really interesting in it. I'm with you. I don't think that there's anything to that or anything pre-planned out about numerology or whatever, however you want to label what it was you were describing. But I do think there's something about consistency. And maybe there's something to say that just that consistency in and of itself lends itself to having certain, in this case, equations work out in a particular way, even though it's completely happenstance that it ends up taking place. To what you were saying, let me go here, because you mentioned at the start of your comment about the romantic arcs in Star Wars, and it's funny because I've really only looked at, well, that's not fair. I never really thought much about the Luke and Leia romantic arc in The Empire Strikes Back until now. Going back and watching those movies in the wake of The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, it has a whole different light. And that relationship is exponentially more important with Kylo, Ben being in the mix. And I love that. I really, really do. I obviously paid attention to the love story in the prequel trilogy. It does break my heart a little bit that Anakin and Padme relationship wasn't handled with a little bit more care. I do love the prequels. I wish that George Lucas had done a better job with dealing with Padme and with Anakin in a couple of those moments. There are some really, really key scenes that I do enjoy. The fireplace scene in Attack of the Clones. I think there's clunky dialogue in there. The I wish I could wish away my feelings drives me nuts. But at the same time, I can also go back in my mind and think about myself at that age and what a dork I was back then when it came to romantic, to romance, and how I would have been just as clunky back then. George was drawing on a very specific dialogue going back to the 30s and 40s. I mean, that's what he was drawing on in those films, and that's reflective in the way that those relationships and those scenes panned out. Looking at The Last Jedi, and this is probably a better way to make my convoluted point. Looking at The Last Jedi, you can't help but go back and go, oh, I wish that those moments in the prequel trilogy had the same weight and impact that they do in The Last Jedi. I mean, can you imagine, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll just say it again because we're here. I mean, imagine that scene between Anakin and Padme, and Anakin, you're breaking my heart, if it was handled in a way that was as emotional and impactful as the post moments of the Praetorian Guard fight. It does enhance those moments in the prequel trilogy. I will say that. Going back to Revenge of the Sith and watching those scenes, for as clunky as they are in comparison to what Rian Johnson was able to get Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley to do, there is more weight and gravity, and I never thought that would be possible in those moments, knowing the path that everybody is going down and what ends up happening at the end of Revenge of the Sith with Anakin becoming Darth Vader, and of course that being the grandfather inspiration for Kylo Ren when we get to The Force Awakens. I do have a better respect for that romance in the prequel trilogy. It gets me more excited for whatever 9 and JJ does, because I would really, however he handles it, I truly would love to see that relationship pan out. It would be, in my view, really, really great to see Ben redeemed, Rey to find somebody in Ben Solo, and have it end on that happily ever after with the two of them. It's going to be tough. I'm not going to, that's going to be a very, very tall mountain, in my opinion, for J.J. Abrams to climb. I think he can do it. I think it's possible. I also think it'll be very, very divisive in the fandom. But the payoff of having that happen in 9, I think, would even take The Last Jedi and bring it up to another level. Now, that being said, I'm not going to stake my enjoyment of that movie based off of my desire to see that happen. I'll wait and find out how they play it out, and if it doesn't work out that way, but it still is great, then I'll be totally happy with that. All right, so one more here, and then we got to wrap things up for this week. All right, let's see. All right, Teeny243 writes this. Always glad to find channels talking respectfully and positively about Rian Johnson's wonderful movie. As for it being a love letter to fans, yes, that's the way I see it too. I just recently got into thinking that way, and there are some other videos out there discussing it, but now I can't shake the idea that both Kylo and Rey could be read as representing different parts of the Star Wars fandom. There's the young, white male fan with his room full of Star Wars memorabilia. Hey, who are you talking about? That would be me. A self-built lightsaber, and his Darth Vader cosplay costume in one hand, and on the other we have a young woman who clearly loves and values all that Star Wars has to say without obsessing over it. She even has her own collectible action figures, singular, I guess, and the latter even comes into the possession of the true lightsaber. I am completely deluded that if you look at it that way, the killing of Han Solo can be seen as the angry mob of fans sort of killing the father. I didn't pre-read this. I didn't know it was going to go this way. This email from Teeny243 is not going to go the way that you think.
This is not going to go the way you think.
All right, so I'm completely deluded that if you think, or you're completely deluded to think if you think of it that way. I'm probably reading that wrong. My bad. The killing of Han Solo can be seen as the angry mob of fans sort of killing the father, killing the creator of Star Wars, saying that he was a disappointment, foolish, and weak because he didn't live up to their expectations. Well, it certainly is an interesting way to put it. But again, when you go back to what Rian Johnson has said and what I said earlier in the show, that it's not going to the reaction to The Last Jedi is not going to influence Rian Johnson's approach to the new trilogy in any way. Watch that if you haven't done it yet. Watch The Director and the Jedi. Rian Johnson's a very interesting character. He's an intense dude. I think he does a very, very good job of keeping how he's feeling in check. He's incredibly assertive. He seems like an incredibly nice guy, but he also seems like the kind of guy that he goes in, this is what he wants to do, this is how he's going to do it, and he is going to tell you that he's going to do it this way in the nicest way possible. But getting back to that previous comment, I mean, that's what good managers end up doing, right? It is funny at the beginning of that Director and the Jedi, the opening shot is of the rat party, and Kathleen Kennedy talks about the unique experience that she had with Ron Bergman and Rian Johnson. And I mentioned this on previous shows. You wonder if J.J. Abrams looks at The Last Jedi and sees all the stuff that Rian Johnson undid. I don't think Rian Johnson undid any of that stuff intentionally. It was just the way that the story ended up working out. But you wonder if J.J. Abrams watched The Director and the Jedi and you see Kathleen Kennedy up on stage going, "This was by far the most unique, incredible experience I've ever had with any directors." If you're J.J. Abrams, you kind of go, "Oh." I imagine you kind of get a little bit sad until you look out the window and you see that dump truck full of cash that it's backed away into the driveway and that it's dumping all that money out for you to direct Episode 9. Yeah, you probably feel bad right up until you see that. All right, thanks again for checking out the show this week. Please by all means, drop me a comment. And it doesn't have to be on topic. You want to hear about something else? You want to hear me go blah, blah, blah about any topic relating to Star Wars? Please, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Drop a comment on the YouTube page as well. Again, Spreaker, iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio. You can find the show. You've obviously found it somewhere, but if any of those locations are more convenient, then go and subscribe to any one of those. So until next week, and what are we on, episode number 117, I hope you have yourself a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you later.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.